The morning mist clung to the Montana ridgeline like a shroud, and I could taste the metallic tang of snow in the air. 3 miles. That's what separated me from the target that would either vindicate everything I'd worked for, or destroy what little credibility I had left in this godforsaken corner of the shooting world. My name is Elena Vasquez, and until 6 months ago, I was nobody special. Just another face in the crowd at Precision Valley Shooting Complex. The kind of woman who drew sideways glances and whispered comments about whether I belonged there at all. The kind who got assigned to the ladies' division automatically, regardless of skill level. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. But today was different. Today, I was about to prove that physics doesn't care about your gender, and neither does a .338 Lapua Magnum traveling at 2,800 feet per second. You sure about this, Elena? Marcus Chun's voice carried a mixture of concern and curiosity as he adjusted the spotting scope beside me. Marcus was one of the few people at the complex who'd treated me like a legitimate shooter from day one. Maybe because he understood what it felt like to be underestimated. His grandfather had been interned during World War II, and Marcus carried that legacy of proving himself in his steady hands and patient demeanor. I settled deeper into my prone position behind the custom rifle I'd spent 2 years building and tuning. Every component had been carefully selected, from the surgeon action to the Bartlein barrel to the Schmidt and Bender scope that cost more than most people's cars. This wasn't just equipment, it was an extension of my will, precision, made manifest in steel and glass. I'm sure, I said, though my heart was hammering against the frozen ground. The target, a steel plate exactly 18 inches square, sat on the opposite ridge like a postage stamp against the vast Montana sky. At this distance, it would appear smaller than a pinhead through my scope. The crowd behind us had grown, larger than I'd expected. Word travels fast in the tight-knit world of extreme long-range shooting, especially when someone claims they're going to attempt something that's never been done before. Not by a woman, anyway. Hell, not by most men. Either. I could hear them whispering, their voices carrying on the thin mountain air. 3 miles is fantasy territory. She's good, but this is just publicity. No way she's compensating for that much bullet drop. The loudest voice belonged to Jake Morrison, a barrel-chested former Marine who held the current record for the longest confirmed shot at this. Range to 2.7 miles. Jake had been vocally skeptical of my abilities since the day I'd outshot him at 1,500 yards during a local competition. His ego hadn't recovered, and he'd made it his personal mission to remind everyone that real long-range shooting was a man's game. This is embarrassing, Jake announced to anyone within earshot. She's gonna waste everyone's time chasing some impossible feminist statement. 3 miles? Come on. The bullet drop alone would put her shot into the next county. I forced myself to tune out the commentary and focus on the fundamentals. Breathing, trigger control, reading the wind. These were the same principles that had carried me through countless hours of practice, through the doubts and setbacks that had nearly made me quit a dozen times. The truth was, I hadn't started shooting to prove anything to anyone. It began as grief therapy after my father's death 3 years ago. Dad had been a machinist, a man who understood precision in ways that went beyond mere measurement. When the cancer took him, I'd inherited his workshop and his love for creating things that worked exactly as intended. Building my first rifle had been a way to stay connected to him, to honor his memory through the same meticulous attention to detail he'd shown me since childhood. The shooting came naturally, or maybe it was just that. I'd finally found something that rewarded patience and precision over flash and bravado. My mother, Rosa, had thought I was crazy when I told her about today's attempt. Mia, she'd said in her careful English, still colored by her childhood in El Salvador, Why do you need to prove yourself to these men? You have good job, good life. Why make trouble? But it wasn't about making trouble. It was about pushing boundaries, about seeing what was possible when you combine physics, engineering, and sheer determination. It was about honoring the countless hours Dad and I had spent in his workshop, talking about tolerances and trajectories while he taught me that excellence was always worth pursuing, regardless of who was watching. The wind had been my biggest concern all morning. At 3 miles, even the slightest breeze could push a bullet several feet off target. I'd been monitoring weather data for weeks, waiting for a day when the atmospheric conditions aligned. Today's forecast showed minimal wind, stable barometric pressure, and the kind of temperature inversion that could actually help carry a bullet farther than normal calculations suggested. Pressed my cheek against the stock and peered through the scope. The target disappeared into the crosshairs, a theoretical point in space that existed more in mathematics than visual reality. At this distance, I wasn't really aiming at what I could see. I was aiming at where my calculation said the target should be, accounting for bullet drop, wind drift, Coriolis effect, and a dozen other variables that most shooters never even considered. Range confirmed at 5,247 yards, Marcus called out, his voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent years as a military sniper before civilian life claimed him. Wind is almost nothing, 2 miles per hour from the northwest. Pressure is 30.15 and steady. I made microscopic adjustments to my scope, dialing in what the ballistic software on my phone insisted was the correct solution. The numbers were staggering. I'd need to aim nearly 90 feet above the target to account for bullet drop alone. At this distance, the projectile would follow a parabolic arc so pronounced that it would climb almost as high as a 10-story building before beginning its long descent toward the target. She's actually going through with this, someone muttered. Behind me. Waste of a good bullet, Jake added with a snort. I took a deep breath and let it out slowly, feeling my heart rate settle into the rhythm I'd trained myself to recognize. This was the zone Dad had taught me about, the place where conscious thought gave way to muscle memory and instinct, where years of practice condensed into a single moment of perfect execution. The rifle felt alive beneath me, 15 pounds of precision. Engineering that had become as familiar as my own heartbeat. I'd named her Esperanza, Hope, after my grandmother, who'd crossed a desert with 3 children and nothing but faith that something better waited on the other side. The crosshairs settled on empty air, approximately 90 feet above where I knew the target to be. Through the scope, I couldn't even see the target anymore, just the mathematical intersection of vertical and horizontal lines that represented thousands of calculations and countless hours of preparation. My finger found the trigger, a jeweled component that broke at exactly 2.5 pounds of pressure. Not yet, though. Not until everything aligned. Winds dropping, Marcus announced quietly. Dead calm across the valley. This was it. The moment when theory met reality, when all the preparation and criticism and doubt would be answered by physics and fate. I thought about Dad, about his steady hands guiding mine as I learned to use his tools. I thought about Mom, worried but proud in her way. I thought about every shooter who'd ever been told they weren't good enough, strong enough, or serious enough to play in the big leagues. Sending it, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The trigger broke like a glass rod, clean and sharp. The rifle bucked against my shoulder with familiar authority, and the muzzle brake redirected the blast in a controlled explosion of gas and flame. The sound rolled across the valley like thunder, echoing off the ridgelines and returning to us transformed into something almost musical. For a heartbeat, maybe 2, the world held its breath. At 3 miles, it would take the bullet nearly 7 seconds to reach the target, assuming it reached the target at all. 7 seconds stretched into eternity, filled with the whispered prayers of physics and the weight of every doubt I'd ever carried. Marcus was tracking the bullet's path through the spotting scope, his body tense with concentration. The crowd behind us had gone completely silent. Even Jake's constant commentary reduced to nothing. Then the sound reached us, not the sharp crack of bullet on steel that we expected, but something else entirely. A deep, rolling boom that seemed to come from the earth itself, followed by a bright flash of light on the distant ridge. What the hell ... Marcus's voice trailed off as he adjusted the spotting scope's magnification. I kept my eye pressed to the rifle scope, trying to understand what I was seeing. Where the target should have been, there was now a smoking crater in the hillside, and what looked like fragments of metal scattered across a 30-foot radius. Did I hit it? I asked, though the evidence suggested something far more dramatic than a simple hit. Marcus was silent for a long moment, working the spotting scope's controls with trembling fingers. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Elena," he said slowly, "you didn't just hit the target. You obliterated it. Completely. There's nothing left but a hole in the ground and pieces of steel scattered everywhere." The crowd erupted behind us, voices raised in excitement and confusion. Someone was shouting about calling the range safety officer. Another voice demanded to see the target through binoculars. Jake Morrison stood frozen, his mouth hanging open in expression of pure shock, but I barely heard any of it. I was staring through my scope at the devastation on the distant ridge, trying to understand how a single bullet, even a very good bullet fired very precisely, could have caused such complete destruction. "Marcus," I said quietly, "that's not normal, is it?" He lowered the spotting scope and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. "Elena, in 20 years of shooting, I've never seen anything like that. It's like your bullet hit an explosive charge or something." The implications of what he was suggesting hit me like a physical blow. If there had been something else on that ridge, something that wasn't supposed to be there, then my perfect shot had just become something much more complicated and potentially dangerous. I could hear footsteps approaching from behind, multiple sets of boots on the rocky ground. Range officials, probably, coming to investigate what had just happened. Or maybe it was Jake and his friends, finally ready to acknowledge that they'd witnessed something extraordinary. But as I began to extract myself from my shooting position, a new sound cut through the morning air, the distant whine of helicopter rotors, growing louder by the second. Not the civilian choppers that occasionally flew over the range, but something heavier, more military in its cadence. "Elena," Marcus said urgently, "we need to go, now." The black helicopters landed within minutes, disgorging men in tactical gear, who moved with military precision. I recognized the type immediately. My brother had been Army Special Forces before an IED took his leg in Afghanistan. These weren't ordinary soldiers. "Elena Vasquez?" The lead agent approached with measured steps, his face hidden behind dark sunglasses despite the overcast sky. "Agent Coleman, Department of Defense, we need to talk." The crowd of shooters was being herded away by his team, their protests growing fainter as they were escorted to the parking area. Jake Morrison looked back over his shoulder, his earlier skepticism replaced by obvious confusion and concern. "What was on that ridge?" I demanded, still clutching my rifle. Coleman exchanged glances with Marcus, who raised his hands in a gesture of surrender. "Your shot was remarkably precise, Ms. Vasquez. Unfortunately, you hit something that wasn't supposed to be there." My stomach dropped. "What kind of something?" "A classified surveillance device. Experimental technology that's been monitoring this area for the past 6 months. He paused, seeming to weigh his words carefully. "Your bullet struck it at exactly the right angle to trigger its self-destruct mechanism." Marcus let out a low whistle. "That's why it exploded like that. The device was designed to eliminate itself if compromised," Coleman continued. "We never anticipated someone would be accurate enough at this distance to actually hit it." He looked at me with something that might have been respect. Frankly, we didn't think it was possible. So what happens now? I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Coleman was quiet for a moment, then surprised me by smiling. Now, Ms. Vasquez, we'd like to offer you a job. The Army's new Extended Range Precision program could use someone with your unique talents. I looked out across the valley where my impossible shot had found its mark, then back at the agent who was offering me a future I'd never imagined. Dad would have been proud. His daughter, the machinist's girl from Montana, recruited by the military for being too good at something they said couldn't be done. Can I think about it? I asked. Of course, but Elena? Coleman's expression grew serious. What happened here today stays classified. As far as anyone knows, you made an incredible shot that destroyed a target, nothing more. I nodded, understanding the weight of what he was asking. Sometimes the most important victories are the ones nobody gets to hear about. The helicopters lifted off an hour later, leaving me standing alone on the ridge with my rifle and a secret that would change everything. I'd proven that 3 miles wasn't impossible after all. I just couldn't tell anyone how I knew. The end up next. You've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.